My name is Vanessa, and I've been married for 10 years. I am now in my early 40s, and although Brian and I do not have children, I have always considered my life calm and peaceful. Brian is my beloved husband, kind, patient, and in his own way a unique person, although outwardly he seems to be an ordinary employee of a large company. There have been no significant changes in his life over the past few years. He is 50, he is 5 years older than me, but it never mattered. Age seemed to us only a figure. We lived happily together in our cozy home, which I have treasured since childhood. I work part-time, and our income has always allowed us to live in prosperity without experiencing financial difficulties. Our days flowed smoothly, without unnecessary worries. We could afford small luxury pleasures, traveling, good restaurants, cozy dinners at home. Our life was like the surface of a calm lake, without storms, but also without excessive excitement. It was an ordinary stability that brought confidence in the future. However, one day the calmness of this smooth surface was disturbed, as if a stone had fallen into a lake and caused ripples that began to grow. It all started with the sad news that my father was gone. This news came suddenly, and despite the fact that I knew about his age and possible health problems, it seemed to me that he still had a lot of time. We weren't particularly close after my marriage, but he was a kind and caring man, and I always felt his support, even from a distance. After his death, I inherited the 2-bedroom apartment he had been living in for the last few years. It was a modern, bright apartment that he bought after he gave me our family home, a spacious 4-bedroom apartment filled with memories of my childhood. When I got married, my father said, "This house is yours now. Let it become your family nest." I remember how I was filled with joy and gratitude then. It was a generous gesture, accompanied by his sincere blessing. I didn't think about it for a long time. I decided to rent a new apartment. It was too small for Brian and me, and given its convenient location and modern design, the rental money would be a good addition to our income. Everything was going reasonably and simply, until one evening there was a strange conversation with Brian's relatives. A proposal was unexpectedly made at a family dinner. "Vanessa, how about your sister Sarah and the kids move into your 4-room apartment?" This statement took me by surprise. Sarah, Brian's younger sister, was divorced and raised 3 children alone. They lived in a cramped 2-room apartment, and it was obvious to everyone that they did not have enough space there. However, the relationship between Sarah and me has always been strained, to say the least. Cool. Sarah, like many others, liked to make caustic remarks about me, hinting that Brian and I still don't have children. At first it was light jokes, but over the years, especially after we both crossed the 30-year mark, her statements became more and more caustic. "You're already over 30, and you're still without children," she once said. Or, "Can a woman without children really be considered a woman?" These words hurt me, but I tried to keep an outward calm. The death of my father and the proposal coming from Sarah led to tension that hung over our daily lives like a thundercloud. I couldn't imagine how I would allow her and her children to live in a house that was so dear to my heart, but what struck me most was the incident that occurred shortly after this conversation. Sarah once quit, "It's a pity that you couldn't show your father the face of his grandson." These words sounded so cold and insensitive that something inside me seemed to snap. I froze, unable to answer right away, and a chill spread all over my body. Sarah, although 3 years older than me, was always perceived as the youngest daughter-in-law, but at that moment she seemed older, even domineering. Despite her sarcastic comments, we tried to be as friendly with her as with our own sister. However, after such remarks, I unknowingly began to build a wall in my heart to protect myself from her hurtful words. I was the only child in the family, and after the death of my father, my whole small family, consisting only of him, disappeared. I grieved for him, trying to make sense of my loss, but Sarah's words penetrated this grief, leaving an unpleasant aftertaste. Time passed, and I didn't see Sarah for a while after the funeral. However, suddenly a new question arose that stirred everything up again. this time from my mother-in-law. She casually dropped the words at lunch and suggested, "Sarah says she will pay $500 a month for rent." I stared at her, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. When I saw the smug expression on her face, I was so amazed that I couldn't find the words right away. The apartment we lived in, although a little old, was in good condition. We took care of her, and she remained quite fit for a comfortable life. The location of the house was excellent. There was a large shopping center nearby. Transport hubs were easily accessible: buses, trains. If we rented this apartment, it could easily cost at least $2,000 a month. But $500? It was absurd. I couldn't believe that they really understood the real market value of the apartment. Perhaps they thought that my silence meant agreement, but this was far from the case. My mother-in-law, full of enthusiasm, continued, "You already have another apartment. You could live there in peace. Even if the lease doesn't last, Sarah and the kids will move here and everything will be fine." She didn't seem to notice my confusion. While Brian, with childish excitement in his voice, added, "This is a really great idea. The apartment your father lived in is new, bright, and perfect for the two of us." I felt the conversation slipping away from me. The excitement was growing. It seemed that all decisions were made without my participation, and I began to panic. Before I knew it, I blurted out, "Isn't it possible for all of us to live together in this apartment?" There was plenty of room in Sarah's house. They lived there alone with the children. The apartment was spacious, and I thought that moving the whole family would not be a problem if they were so eager for more space. Besides, if they really want to live in more spacious housing, it would be logical to discuss this with us in advance. However, as it turned out, the laws of the mother-in-law played a role. Sarah's children had to change schools, and they were worried about the hassle and cost of new school uniforms and sports equipment. I did not dare to clearly express my reluctance to rent our apartment to Sarah right in front of my mother-in-law. Instead, I said, "This house is my hometown," as if evading a direct answer. When the conversation came to an end, the mother-in-law remarked with apparent courtesy, "You don't have to decide everything at once," but I knew she hadn't really given up. When I returned home, I bitterly asked Brian, "This apartment is very dear to us. Why did you decide to leave her so easily?" He looked at me in surprise, as if he didn't understand what I was talking about. "It's a good thing it's not a single-family house," he said with some indifference. I was shocked. Brian, who grew up in a single-family home, just didn't see the same value in the apartment as I did. For him, it was just a temporary object, something secondary. I expected him to at least try to understand my feelings, but he didn't even seem to realize them. My patience has run out. I raised my voice. "This is my house, my apartment. Why are you deciding everything without consulting me?" Brian looked upset, and there was a note of annoyance in his voice. "We've been married for 10 years. Why do you say, my apartment? This is our apartment." I wanted Brian to really try to understand my feelings about this apartment for once, not just as a place, but as a house to which I gave a piece of myself. If he had hesitated even a little in his decision to give it to Sarah, I probably wouldn't have felt so offended. But at that moment, bitterness pierced me, as if our connection, our place, turned out to be nothing to him. Our subsequent attempts to calmly discuss this issue ended in vain. Brian seemed to pull away from my feelings, not understanding the depth of my disappointment. Accusations were increasingly heard in his words: hungry for money, stubborn, selfish. Every word was a heavy stone between us. Time passed, the seasons changed each other, and the wall built between us remained unshakable. The pressure from his mother-in-law and Brian was growing. The mother-in-law never tired of asking questions. "Well, how are the negotiations on living together with Sarah going?" These constant reminders and requests to discuss my feelings about the apartment took away my strength every day. One day I felt that I had reached the limit. Just at that moment, I received an unexpected email from Sarah. It was harsh, almost aggressive. Why can't you two, who don't have children, move? You don't need that much space. Just go away. These words pierced me to the depths of my soul. I never thought that Sarah would dare to declare her intention to occupy the apartment so bluntly. It was as if she was ordering me to leave without even trying to discuss or understand. I sat stunned, realizing how much pain, resentment, and misunderstanding had accumulated over all this time. Thoughts of divorce have visited me more than once. But every time they came, I forced myself to stop, tried to calm down, regain control of the situation. However, this letter was the last straw. I decided it was time for me to make a move. I went to the local authority to find out how to start the divorce process. By that time, I already felt that I could no longer keep everything inside. I also sought legal advice. It was necessary to clarify the situation with the apartments. A few days later, gathering my thoughts, I went to court. The checks showed that both apartments, the one I lived in and the one we rented, were registered in my name. These were my apartments. Realizing this fact, I finally decided to sort out our relationship with Brian. I wanted to sit down and discuss everything in detail with him. That night, I said to Brian, "I've told you many times that this is my home. I can't stand the thought of letting this apartment to Sarah. I don't want my house occupied by a man who humiliates me and looks down on me. Please talk to your mother and Sarah." I saw Brian's face darken. He looked thoughtful, as if he was thinking about this topic again. I told him everything that had accumulated in my soul, how Sarah humiliated me, how I tolerated her barbs and sarcasm. I wanted him to finally understand how much I dislike her presence in our lives. But Brian didn't seem to be going to support me. He sighed and said softly, "Sarah is right." At that moment, I felt our bond weaken even more. Looking back, I realized that I could have divorced even then, thereby saving myself from further torment. But 10 years is not a period that can be easily shrugged off. However, at that moment I realized that deep down I was already ready for a divorce. Brian tried to soften the situation. "Maybe you're just too sensitive to Sarah. You may think she's condescending, but you're exaggerating her words. I don't quite understand why you feel that way." Those words hit me harder than I could have imagined. He didn't know the whole story, didn't understand my pain. I felt empty. Was it just my perception? Or was I really the only one who felt such bitterness? I took out the divorce papers and slowly put them in front of him. Shock was reflected on his face, his eyes widened in surprise. "Are you serious?" "What is it?" he asked softly. "Do you really want to end our relationship because of such a trivial matter?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm serious," I said. "I care about Sarah too, but our relationship has changed. Lately, I don't feel love anymore. That's why I'm leaving." My heart ached from Brian's indifference, from his frivolous smile, which seemed to say, "You worry too much." He didn't realize the seriousness of my feelings, and I felt like a tear was about to spill. At that moment, I wished he would just leave so that I would no longer see that face filled with misunderstanding and stubbornness. "Sarah and your mother may not always get along with you," I said with difficulty, realizing that my words would not be able to change his relationship. "Have you ever thought about it? You are always focused only on yourself. That's why our relationship is like this." My words became quieter, but no less tense. Brian, softening a little, said softly, "We've always been like this. We don't understand each other. Even when we're trying to take care." He looked at me, and his gaze was filled with thoughtfulness. However, it wasn't the attention I expected. His words seemed formal, as if he was trying to explain the inevitability of our differences rather than find a solution. "I think our relationship is beyond repair," I continued, feeling a chill of hopelessness creep into my words. "No matter how much we talk, there is always a distance between our hearts. I can't even imagine our future together anymore. If you don't react to my feelings now, we'll have to meet in court." My words came out slowly, as if each phrase had been brought to the surface with difficulty. Brian started, his face showing a mixture of surprise and sadness. He seemed to realize the gravity of what was happening. "Do you really feel that way?" "What is it?" he asked quietly, as if hoping that I would say no and everything would go back to normal. Brian left the house without saying another word. This silence was deafening, like a silent storm tearing apart our world. He probably didn't want to continue the conversation. Leaving was his way of avoiding a situation he couldn't control. He didn't sign the divorce papers, he just left his stuff. A few days later, Brian returned. His eyes were full of sadness, and there was uncertainty in his gaze, as if he did not know what to do next. "What should we do now?" "What is it?" he asked softly, as if hoping for a new chance. I sighed, looking at him, wondering if I would forgive him if he changed. Maybe I would have done it once. But now things had gone too far. "It's all settled," I said with firmness in my voice. "There is nothing more to discuss. If you agree to a divorce, sign the documents. If not, we'll have to decide it in court." "And the house?" "I'm leaving him," I added, realizing that there would be no turning back from this decision. I have been thinking about selling the apartment for a long time. Brian looked stunned, but remained silent. The day I picked up the documents, I turned to Mr. Thomas, an old friend of my father's. We have known him since childhood, and he was by my family's side during the most difficult times. He attended my father's funeral and gave me his business card, saying, "If you ever need help, feel free to contact me." The card had the details of his law firm on it, and I saved it just in case. Mr. Thomas, upon learning about my situation, gave me some valuable advice. He talked about the importance of checking property rights, the complexity of divorce negotiations, and I realized how important it was to protect myself at this moment. Thanks to the support, I was able to maintain confidence in my actions. After Brian left the house, I decided it was time to sell the apartment. After contacting the real estate agents, I informed them of my intention. I also told Mr. Thomas about my deteriorating relationship with Brian and his reluctance to sign the divorce papers. I needed his support for the next steps. When Brian found out about the sale of the apartment, his reaction was a mixture of shock and anger. "You always said this was our family home," he blurted out. "Are you really planning to give up such an important place? And after you were so worried about Sarah? You're really selfish." His words didn't hit me like they used to. At that moment, I felt a calmness that I hadn't felt in a long time. "Do you have anything else to say?" I asked, meeting his gaze. Brian sighed heavily, confused for a moment, but quickly found the words. "Why did you decide this on your own?" "What is it?" he asked with desperation in his voice. "This apartment may be in your name, but we live here together. Isn't this our common home?" I smiled slightly and, looking into his eyes, calmly replied. "The apartment was registered to me before we got married. I have already consulted with a lawyer, and he has confirmed that any property acquired before marriage is not subject to division." This knowledge gave me peace of mind. The sale of the apartment, of course, caused resistance, especially from Brian, but I knew that I could not continue to live in this house, where so much pain and misunderstanding had accumulated. The information from Mr. Thomas about the division of the property helped me to make a final decision. I decided to sell it decisively. Brian, upon learning the truth, suddenly changed his attitude. His voice softened, and there was uncertainty in his words. "I'm sorry this place was so important to you," he began. "But it hasn't been sold yet, has it? Let's think again. Maybe we can fix it. I'll talk to Sarah and Mom, I promise. Please, there is no need to get divorced and sell the apartment." His words, which sounded like a plea, startled me. I suddenly realized how long I had been trying to keep our relationship going, even though he had never really understood me. Why have I stayed with him all these 10 years? Flashed through my mind. I couldn't believe that I had chosen a man who had never taken my side in all this time. And now, when everything is falling apart, he, oddly enough, asks for a new beginning. It seemed incomprehensible. "Don't try to make a good face," I said, not hiding my disappointment. "All this time, when we were together, you never supported me once. Did you really think you could start over? It's not possible right now. We both need to move on." I saw the confusion on his face. But the rift between us is too deep to fix anything. After going through many procedures and experiences, I finally managed to end our relationship. It was the beginning of a new life for me. And although initially the thought of living alone seemed scary to me, I soon realized that it wasn't really as scary as I thought. Now I live in a new 3-room apartment, and this place has become a reflection of my desires and decisions. I feel free here. I live on my own terms. "Don't worry," I told myself. "Even if you're not around anymore, everything will be fine. Mom is here, and everything will be fine. There are no more problems." But throughout all this time, my past still shadowed me. Brian, with his aloofness and cruelty, coldly threw. "Those words don't mean anything. No matter what you decide, I can always move on." His words sounded unexpected, like a blow. I remembered how we had recently lived together, and every month I sent $2,300 to his mother's accounts, helping to cover expenses and support the family. But at that moment, his indifference seemed to expose all the lies that were hiding behind our lives. My mother-in-law, as always, added oil to the fire. "A wife who can't even do household chores is not needed," she said with a cold expression on her face. She looked at me with a look full of satisfaction, as if she expected my defeat. I realized that it was useless to keep pleasing these people. That was the moment when I decided to leave. "Really?" I replied to Carly with a slight smile. "If that's what you think, then I have no choice but to leave it all behind." My husband, who always seemed strong and confident to me, was suddenly left in surprise, not understanding how quickly I was able to make such a decision. "My name is Claire," I said. I was 32 years old and I worked in an office. My acquaintance with Rupert happened on a blind date organized by a friend. We immediately found a common language, and a few months later we got married. Our marriage was now in its 5th year. We haven't had children yet, but I always thought it was temporary. Rupert lived with his mother before we got married. However, after the wedding, we decided to build a house on his family's territory. It was Rupert's idea. He was always worried about his mother. I recalled his words. "Mom lives alone, and I want her to be closer to us. But I also want us to have our own life, just the two of us." The idea seemed reasonable. We agreed that the house would be ours, but everything was built on the territory of his family. However, later I bitterly realized how naive this thought was. Our marriage began, it would seem, perfectly. We were both busy at work, and household chores didn't take up much time. Our new house was spacious, bright, and easy to care for. My mother-in-law rarely came to us, as she was absorbed in her part-time job. My husband and I split the cost of her maintenance in half, and everything went smoothly. In those days, I sincerely believed that we had found the perfect balance, where everyone contributes. But one day Rupert made an unexpected offer. He said, "I'll take care of all the household expenses. But could you, Claire, transfer money to my mom every month? I think $1,500 will be enough." I agreed, although the amount seemed to me somewhat less than before. I felt a certain awkwardness in my soul, but decided not to raise this issue. Instead, I started sending my mother-in-law $2,300 a month without telling Rupert about it. This amount was a significant part of my salary, but I did not complain, since the rest of the expenses, utilities, groceries, medical bills, were paid by Rupert. Our joint account worked like clockwork. We distributed the money in such a way that everything went to cover needs and savings. However, a year later, the situation changed. My mother-in-law, deciding that her age allowed her to rest, left her part-time job. And from that moment on, her visits to our house became more frequent. "I'm getting old," she said one day, "so I can't work anymore. Rupert, I don't have to force myself anymore, because you've always been my rock." She said it warmly, and Rupert, as always, responded with understanding. They exchanged sweet smiles and pleasantries. But soon after her words, it became clear to me that her presence was not limited only to warmth. She began to find flaws in literally everything. "You haven't cleaned up the dust in the corners," she pointed to a slightly dusty shelf. "And the food you cook is not too complicated. I've heard you use simple recipes." I smiled sheepishly. "Yes, sometimes I cook something simple when I come home from work late, but I try my best." "Perhaps we made a mistake in choosing you to marry Rupert," she said coldly. "Besides, you've been married for so many years, and you still don't have children. It's your fault too, isn't it?" Her words sounded like an accusation. I was on edge, but I knew it was useless to argue with her. Any response would only cause a new conflict, and I wanted to avoid that at all costs. Rupert seemed preoccupied with his own affairs and ignored her remarks. Our initial agreement that his mother would help around the house when needed has been completely forgotten. Now she was creating problems rather than making our lives easier. The most disturbing thing was that I noticed a decrease in the balance on our shared account. For 3 months in a row, Rupert's salary was not credited to the account. This alerted me, and one evening I asked him, "Rupert, what's going on? Why hasn't your salary been transferred for several months?" He hesitated, his face became serious, and concern was reflected in his eyes. "I quit my job," he quietly confessed. My heart skipped a beat. "What? Did you quit? Why didn't you tell me?" "I was looking for a new job," he replied. "I just didn't want to bother you." My boss was terribly strict. He constantly picked on me for the slightest mistakes, and once even said that the company had lost a lot of money because of me. I was stunned. Usually such mistakes require at least a warning from the boss, but Rupert didn't seem to admit his guilt. I listened to his halting explanation with growing concern, but I knew it was impossible to change his mind. He had already quit, and we had to discuss what to do next. "Are there any prospects of finding a new job?" I asked cautiously, trying to contain my irritation. "The problem is that at this stage I can't find a company that matches my skills," he replied without taking his eyes off the laptop screen. "But maybe we should temporarily settle for something less?" "We can't afford to be picky right now," I suggested, trying to stay calm. "No," said Rupert decisively. "I want to find a job where I can stay until retirement. I need to choose carefully." I bit my lip, trying to suppress my irritation. His stubbornness was a real test for me. The financial situation worsened every day, and my salary no longer covered all expenses. Not only did we reduce our mother-in-law's transfers, but we also started diving into our savings. Money was getting less and less, and I realized that we would soon have to reconsider our usual spending. But what should we do with our finances? I continued desperately. "You don't understand that I can't do it alone. You're working, so you can support us," he said casually, not looking in my direction. I realized that he wasn't going to change his position. Rupert was counting on me to get us out of this situation without thinking about the cost it might cost me. The feeling of injustice grew inside me every day. "I have made a decision. I will increase my working hours in order to somehow improve our financial situation." Fortunately, I was appreciated at work, and my request for recycling was met with alacrity. But every time I returned home late, I was faced with condemnation. My mother-in-law met me on the doorstep with a displeased expression on her face. Her sarcastic remarks have become the norm. Why is the house so messy? Can't you at least dust it off, since you work so much? One day she uttered these words with contempt, looking around the room. I'm sorry, I replied, barely hiding my irritation. I'm very busy at work, and I just don't have time. Excuses, she snorted. So now you're going to complain to Rupert so he'll give you more money? I also need money to live on, and your $2,300 is a mere penny. I couldn't believe my ears. My mother-in-law took the money I earned with hard work for granted. Her attitude towards the amount, which was significant to me, seemed disrespectful. Not only did she not appreciate my efforts, but she openly humiliated me in front of Rupert. You don't even do housework, and Rupert is suffering because of such an incompetent daughter-in-law. She continued, and there was complete confidence in her voice. I looked at her and didn't understand how anyone could be so blind to reality. My mother-in-law rarely took on household chores herself. She often bought ready-made meals at the supermarket, and although she could have helped with the cleaning, she washed only for herself and Rupert. When I came home, there were dirty plates in the kitchen, and dinner, cooked by her and Rupert, was just for them. For me, they usually left cold leftovers, as if I didn't belong to this family. Rupert was sitting relaxed on the couch, staring at the TV, not even trying to interfere, when his mother hurled her harsh words at me. My affection for my husband was weakening every day. He wasn't looking for a new job, at least not as actively as he claimed. His pride would not allow him to accept less prestigious offers, and as a result, a year had passed and no job had been found. Hey, if this keeps up, our savings will run out soon, I told him one evening. Maybe you'll start working at least part-time to contribute? Rupert looked up at me sharply, his face dark with annoyance. What other part-time job? He said coldly. This house is in my name. You just live here and you can't even take care of me properly. So it's natural that you'll pay for everything. His words were like a slap in the face. I've been taking on all the financial responsibility for the two of us for a long time, and I've also been sending money to his mother. But now I realized how precarious our future was. If things continue like this, I won't be able to take it anymore. You know, there is a limit to how much I can earn, and the $2,300 that you so easily call just is the result of my constant efforts and hardships, I said bitterly, trying to keep from crying. Stop grumbling, Rupert interrupted coldly, slamming the table in exasperation. If you don't like it, you can leave my house. These words scattered in the air like heavy stones, hitting the very soul. I stood in a daze, not believing my ears. He said it so easily, as if our relationship meant nothing to him. My dedication, efforts, work, everything I did for us, in his eyes devalued to a negligible amount, only $2,300. Our marriage gradually turned into a battlefield where each of us defended our egos, moving away from each other more and more. However, at this time, oddly enough, good news came. Rupert had the opportunity to get a job at a company run by a friend of his mother. Although the salary was lower than at his previous job, for me it seemed like a salvation, at least temporarily. The probation period is 3 months, Rupert said reluctantly when I tried to support him. But I don't think this company matches my skills. But it's hard to say no, because my mother introduced me to this man. Don't worry, I tried to cheer him up. The main thing is that you are working again. Try your best, and you will be accepted permanently. However, something in me already felt that this job could bring even more problems than solutions. And my fears were soon confirmed. A month after starting work, Rupert started coming home later and later. Sometimes he was not at home at all at night, and from his clothes came the scent of a woman's perfume, which was unfamiliar to me. He also stopped contributing his salary to our joint account, which caused me serious concern. On top of that, he started withdrawing money from this account without my permission and continued to transfer money to his mother on a regular basis. When I decided to stop making deposits to the general account, Rupert lost his temper. "Why don't you put money in the account anymore? The balance is almost at zero. Where did your money go?" "What is it?" he asked angrily, looking at me suspiciously. "Tell me, how do you use your money?" I replied sharply, no longer able to contain my emotions. "Shut up," he muttered. "I have friends I can talk to. You won't understand." His words cut into me. I was the only one who earned money for our existence, the only one who really tried to keep our lives afloat, and now he demanded that I also cover his pocket money expenses and his mother's monthly transfers. It wasn't fair. Besides, his behavior, the smell of perfume, and frequent lateness aroused my suspicions. I couldn't turn a blind eye to the obvious anymore. Rupert could have had another woman. But I didn't have any proof, so I decided to find it. It would be too expensive to contact a private investigator, so I decided to take on this case myself. One night, when Rupert was fast asleep, I crept up to him and unlocked his phone using his fingerprint. My heart was pounding, but to my surprise, it worked. Correspondence with a woman named Saren revealed the whole truth. The messages were frankly personal. "I enjoyed our date so much today. I wish we could be together forever," she wrote. "Will you think about marrying me? I'll get rid of my wife. I can't wait to start a new life in our house." I was shocked. The world that I had been building for so long collapsed in an instant. Gritting my teeth, I quickly forwarded these messages to my phone and began to make a plan for further action. I needed to find out who Saren was and what they were planning. A day later, when I returned from work, I noticed that there were several new bags in the hallway. "What is it?" I asked, feeling anxiety building inside me. "I've decided to live with my mom," Rupert said coldly, not even looking at me. "You can't handle household chores, and I'm tired of putting up with it. Did you decide to live with her without consulting me? This is my home. You have no right to make such decisions without my participation." There was a note of panic in my voice. "This is my house," Rupert replied indifferently. "And as long as you live here, you should fulfill my conditions. I pay my mother's living expenses and transfers, so you have nothing to complain about." These words were like the last straw. My mother-in-law, who was nearby, added fuel to the fire, accusing me of being a useless wife who could not cope with basic household duties. I couldn't take it anymore. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, watching the movers carefully take out my things. Her gaze was sharp, but at the same time filled with vindictive satisfaction. She seemed to be enjoying what was happening, as if this moment for her was the culmination of all her small victories in our endless disagreements. "You're finally leaving," she chuckled, her voice mocking. "It's about time. Rupert needs a real woman who knows how to keep a house, not one who only complains about life and hides behind her own affairs." I, continuing to observe the work of the movers, just nodded calmly. Her words have long lost all power over me. Each of her attacks now sounded like a distant noise that could no longer penetrate my armor of calm. I had made a choice, and now this new stage of my life was inevitable and necessary. "You know," I finally began, paying attention to her, "I'm not going to justify myself to you. Everything I've done for our family. But it seems that this was not enough. You needed someone else, someone more submissive and less ambitious. So I leave you with this real home. Let's see how long you'll be happy in it." Her smile faltered a little, but she quickly regained her former look, as if my words had not offended her at all. She stood there silently, staring at me, as if she was trying to make me feel guilty. But the guilt has long since dissolved in me, along with the hope that everything that was destroyed between me and Rupert can be restored. "I hope Saren lives up to your expectations," I added with a slight grin, heading for the exit. Young, beautiful, and ready to please, just like you wanted. In response, my mother-in-law just rolled her eyes, but I noticed how her fingers tightened on the arm of the chair. Apparently, even she understood that the fairy tale with the perfect daughter-in-law might not be as brilliant as she had hoped. When the last things were packed into the truck, I stopped at the doorstep of my former home. There was a strange twinge in my chest, not from regret, but rather from the realization that an entire chapter of my life had ended. Everything that was invested in this house, in this marriage, is left behind. There was a new road ahead, and I could finally take steps forward without looking back. Well, I drawled, taking one last look at my mother-in-law, good luck to you. And without waiting for her answer, I went outside, feeling the cool wind blowing over my face like a breath of freedom. The truck started moving, and I looked at it and felt the weight of the last few months slowly disappear. It was my first step towards a new life, a life where Rupert and his mother were no longer there, nor the pain they caused me. The next day, as planned, I submitted the documents to the city administration, issued all the necessary papers. The divorce process was launched, and the lawyer I hired helped me deal with the legal details. With each step, I became more and more convinced that I had made the right choice. But still, despite the storm, I felt at peace. I found a stylish apartment in a quiet area where I could finally be myself. This place became a symbol of my new beginning, and as soon as the movers finished arranging the furniture, I sat down on my new sofa and felt real relief for the first time in a long time. There was a new chapter ahead, calm, independent, and belonging only to me. The house was empty. Everything around me seemed so alien, faceless, as if everything that once filled it with warmth and meaning had disappeared along with the things that I took away. Every detail of the interior reminded me of the time when, full of hope and enthusiasm, I was arranging this house, trying to turn it into a cozy family nest. My mother-in-law watched me with genuine annoyance, realizing that she no longer had power over me. "You're taking everything. The house will be so empty," she drawled with bitterness in her voice. "These are all my things that I bought when we got married," I replied calmly. I spent my savings on furniture and household appliances, because despite Rupert's promises, neither he nor you did anything for it. The house is registered in Rupert's name, but all these things belong to me. She couldn't object. Her lips tightened into a thin line, and for a moment it seemed to me that she was about to explode with indignation, but instead she silently turned away, leaving me alone in an empty, cold space. However, I no longer felt resentment, just a slight relief that this part of my life was finally over. After moving into a new apartment, everything suddenly became much easier. My new home, stylish and cozy, became a place where I finally found peace. Living alone turned out to be a real blessing. No one dictated their terms to me anymore, and every dollar I earned was now at my disposal. I enjoyed this new rhythm of life, enjoyed the freedom and the opportunity to manage my time the way I wanted. A job that once seemed like a simple duty was now a pleasure, because every week I felt my professional confidence and status grow. Over time, I was promoted and my salary increased significantly, which allowed me to further strengthen my financial independence. 3 months passed in this quiet harmony, until the phone began to burst with constant calls. It was my mother-in-law, but her insistence did not make me want to answer. Several times I thought about blocking her number, but, tired of the constant vibrations of the phone, I decided to answer anyway. "Oh, Claire, you finally picked up the phone," she began with a certain excitement in her voice. "Listen, I've been thinking. Can you come back? Everything is not the same as it was before. I am very sorry for everything that happened." I calmly listened to her halting speech, in which she tried to justify herself, but her voice sounded too fake for me to believe a single word. "You wanted me to leave," I reminded her. "Now I'm gone, and there's nothing to return. But you could still continue to help. $2,300 in my account," as before. Her request sounded almost like an order, as if she still believed that she had some kind of power over me. You know I have nothing to do with you anymore, I said firmly. I refuse. I resolutely hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number. I also blocked Rupert, no longer wanting to participate in their lives. Nevertheless, a few days later, he ambushed me near work. Claire, I'm sorry. Can we start over? His voice was full of despair, but instead of sympathy, I felt only irritation. What are you doing here? I asked, puzzled by his appearance. Saren is gone. I tried to live with her, but it only got worse. She couldn't do the housework, and her irritation was growing every day, he explained, his voice trembling as if he was on the verge. We quarreled constantly, and when the novel surfaced, everything finally collapsed. He looked at me pleadingly, as if I could solve all his problems, but his complaints and requests only caused disgust. Everything he said only confirmed that I had made the right decision by leaving him. It's too late, Rupert. I'm not going to see you again, and if you try to follow me again, I'll call the police. I turned around and walked away, ignoring his screams and pleas. Through my lawyer, I have already received compensation, $30,000 from Rupert and an additional $155,000 from Saren. This money has become for me a symbol of a closed chapter, bitter but over. I heard that Rupert was trying to borrow money from questionable people to pay off his debts, and now he was combining several part-time jobs to somehow make ends meet. His mother, having returned to a low-paying job, complained about fate and blamed her son for her failures. Saren, mired in debt, worked night shifts and eventually completely severed all ties with Rupert. Their lives now resembled chaos, full of accusations and quarrels. And I found my peace of mind. In a new apartment, with a small dog that filled my house with warmth and joy, I began to enjoy every minute of my life. There was a new world full of possibilities ahead, and I was looking forward to the next wonderful meeting, knowing that this chapter of my life finally belonged only to me.